So this is the third annual Cloud Summit for Microsoft Technologies. Last year, we did a series of presentations, made some bold predictions, and discussed a lot of ways customers can benefit from the Microsoft Cloud. This panel discussion, we're going to take a look back. We're going to take a look at what we thought was going to happen or some processes we best recommended, and we want to see how it's worked out over the last year. And we'll do the same thing next year and so on and so on. And I've got a great panel today and for this discussion. Everybody here was here last year. So we've got Bob Ballard. Bob's a principal cloud strategist with us. Jeff Fowler, he's a senior cloud strategist in our federal group. Jen Mason, who's the director of our innovation. Dave Riley is a cloud strategist and a client director here at Planet. And Jerry Martin, who's one of our senior cloud strategists. And by the way, I've known Jerry how many years?
Too many to count.
He tells me I owe him a glass full of something soon enough, and I'm going to get to that. So guys, last year we made some predictions.
We did.
What are some of the surprises? What are the things we thought might happen around life cycle, around end user adoption, around Skype voice, around dynamics, around security? Were some of the things we thought were going to happen that happened exactly like we thought, or maybe in a slightly different way?
I mean, I can fess up right out of the gate
Great.
on Skype voice, right? We can all start laughing, right? So, and by the way, I'll say we're only half off in that I think the things we talked about and the adoption curve and the interest and all of that around voice in the cloud is equally the same, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, we didn't miss on that. The only thing we missed on was the fact that it was all going to be enveloped into Teams, right?
Right.
We knew about Teams, but I don't think we really realized the speed at which Teams was just going to swallow Skype for Business whole, right?
Or
More
the
or less.
speed at which Teams was going to actually roll out to the gov tenants.
Right,
Because last year we were like,
Took a
and
while.
Teams is coming any day now. And in reality,
It came yesterday
came
and a half
this
a minute before
year.
that. Yeah.
so I think that was a bit of a shocker. So Teams became much bigger, went much slower when it came to the Gov Cloud, but I think it also did more.
You
I think
think
more of the compliance features are in there.
Maybe the net result of it coming out faster than it was slowed that adoption down from a voice perspective a little bit because of the wait. Everybody was anticipating something that was going to change.
Absolutely.
I think that might have been a little bit of the indication that things slowed down from that voice adoption too.
And I think it was a great opportunity for us because now we have a whole year of it being in the enterprise, seeing lessons learned that everybody's had, and now we can apply it and take those pieces. So
Right.
it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it was very shocking to me how everybody kept saying it's coming, and then it eventually somebody was telling the truth.
And to that point, right, so the governance discussions that we started last year, I think,
Yeah.
stretched out a little bit longer as a result because there's more to discuss and there's more things coming, but that's the inherent nature of the cloud, right? And what
Yeah.
we've been saying to our customers for some time, we'll continue saying for some time is it's an evergreen service, it's going to continually evolve, may not come out exactly when we want it to, but it's something where as a customer, we need to prepare our customers to make sure they're ready for this type of thing.
I would actually think that, and I think in the long run, it actually worked out better this way. Because I know when we look at our opportunities that we're working on right now and the rollouts that we're working on right now, both from a Teams and from a voice perspective, I think that it's been more time for people to do some study, to do some research and get comfortable with the notion. So I feel like instead of really riding up the hill and trying to drive up the hill in terms of customer interest, we actually see a lot of interest now that we might not have seen if it had
Right.
been available earlier. Do you guys agree
Yeah,
with that?
absolutely.
there was a lot of pre-planning, pre-delivery, right? So normally, as these technologies are cutting edge, our government customers are not spending 6 months in advance thinking about them.
Right.
Right, and for the first time, literally 18 months in advance, something in that neighborhood, right? So, and for of those 18 months, 12 of those months, it was coming any day, right? Right. So next quarter, right? So, I'm totally agree with you on that, Steve. And I think that the day that it shipped, there were customers lining up to turn it on because they've been talking about it for a year.
Outside of that anticipation by itself, it also gave us a great deal of time to consider all the things that we need to work through. You talked about a little bit of the feature functions in Teams as an app, it's not just Skype in that case, right? The extensive collaboration and data sharing pieces take on a whole new security conversation as you do that. So the client itself said, open the thinking a little bit broader to this aspect and really look at it differently than the Skype type of rollout. So.
Yeah, and exactly as mentioned a moment ago, compliance, I mean, that aspect alone, talking to Microsoft even just 6 months ago, they're like, yeah, the features you need are a version away. We'll have that soon, we'll have that soon. And it actually has been a good 3 to 6 months where they finally got the compliance, the auditing capabilities, and the DLP aspects actually built into Teams natively versus well, maybe we can bolt that on somehow or get some duct tape and baling wire. So it has come a really long way, though.
Well, and to pull it full circle back to what we originally started talking about, which was Skype Voice, right? The voice side of Teams has made tremendous strides in the last 6 months.
Oh, yeah.
That, to the point where we used to have to say, okay, yeah, if you're really pushing what you're doing with Skype for Business, Teams is not for you yet. And that's really not the case, but that's only been very recently as the comparison between the two clients are really catching up to each other.
Yeah. And the advantage there for us going forward is that we don't have to have conversations with our customers about one and then the other. Right now, Teams has made it possible for them to consider it, whereas in the past, we had to deal with the IT staff and then the telephony staff. Teams kind of converges those two technologies together, and you can still talk to the IT staff and hopefully, get Teams and Skype rolled out at the same time.
And I want to kind of jump into there because I think if we look at one of the areas we absolutely hit out of the park and we want to double down on is that whole last year we had it in the framework of a life cycle of deployment, but that's so important now because we had these dialogues in the summit all about the M365 suite and what's included in this notion. Every conversation we had about it, whether it be through the Teams, collaboration piece, the security piece, everything was about assessment, right? And understanding what you have, like taking the time to understand what you have, mapping it into a business plan, and how it's going to benefit your business, and then go backwards to how you're going to implement it, right, as opposed to a technology project. So I think we knocked it out of the park there, and we were even double downing, is that a word? That we're doubling down on it this year, right?
Yeah.
Oh, no doubt. I think the other piece of Teams has an impact across the board, not just from a voice perspective and the collaboration piece, but for the longest time we've done a lot of things from an end user point of view. I'm the endpoint as well as my machine. And my view on a regular basis, my front door to the environment's always been Outlook. It just is, right? And I will bet next year when we're talking about this that front door is Teams. Right. Because I have my mail, I have my collaboration, I have my IM and my voice potential. I have that front door is going to be Teams.
But it's only going to be Teams if we assess the environment properly.
Oh, I agree.
Right.
I mean, I just really want to kind of hit on that because, again, we got it right, so I wanted to talk about it. But, so really, like, in this nomenclature, understand what you own, understand what it can do for you, figure out how it maps to your business goals, where you want to be in the end, and then work backwards. So can we jump in and dive in on that a little bit? Sure. Jeff, you talked a little bit on your security session, but.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting to watch the transition over the past year alone as Microsoft has really accelerated the deployment, the feature enhancements, the feature parity between Teams and Skype, for instance, as a moment ago. And from a life cycle perspective, where it was every 3 years, it became once a year, and that's once a quarter. Now it's once every few weeks. New things are coming out constantly. So just watching the evolution, it's been a really, it's been a lot of time, a fun time being in tech right now to watch these things as they're coming down the pipe and just being able to support customers and the mission of the organization and say, hey, the features you're looking for actually are here now. And here's how to truly map these things together, make sure you get the best benefit out for your organization.
And the customers who are best capable of doing that are the ones that took the time that we said there was a little bit of a gap there to understand what's coming and understand how best their organization can adapt to those changes and understand the security and compliance perspective. They're ahead of the game. There are more customers out there that are fundamentally have to get through that process, and I think we can help them from a life cycle perspective gain better knowledge and understand what are the options, how do you make sure the end users aren't left behind, they have the right training, the right platform for it, and support. But yeah, there's a lot to do.
Now, when we talk about adoption, that was another big piece of it last year, consumption of the services, adoption, gathering the ROI from the investment that you're making. You know, I think we've seen in our patch, those customers that have invested in that have seen really, really positive results. I mean, I'm assuming that we all agree with that, right?
Oh,
When you-
definitely.
Yes.
But just like all of this, and I think this gets back to this, what you were just saying, Jeff, whether it's adoption, assessment, life cycle, even the technology rollout pieces of it, you're not done. Like this concept of being done from an IT perspective, from a project
exist.
The
perspective,
roadmap doesn't stop.
it doesn't stop, right? I mean, that's both a good thing and a challenge as
And
well.
the features don't stop coming out either. So I
Nope,
mean, this,
not at all.
Right. So where have we seen wins from the adoption
Right.
perspective?
So many people that have taken and looked at, okay, this is what we need to do and offer up as adoption to our entire organization, and here's our big communication strategy and how we're going to do training, and then they subdivided and went into smaller groups. We had some really big wins at an estate on the East Coast who said, I have a group of lawyers and they're in my legal department, and you know what they do all day? They work in Word and they format documents and they need table of contents and they need to do footnotes and references. Can we create a skill track that's not about that in Word, but that's being a lawyer in this state? And we're going to give them an hour-long skill track, and it's going to take them to the 10 things they need to know in Word, not the 82 billion things I can do in Word, just the 10 that I need to know. And then we're going to do the same thing with communications. The communications department uses Word as well, but they use headers and footers and
Style sheets,
styles
yeah.
and changing fonts and colors. Let's create something for them. And so it's really the ones that have looked at not training as I need to offer training and it's just a checkbox item, but the ones that have said I want to understand who my users are and then I want to provide them tools to get it, we're seeing great adoption in that. And so whether it's doing it by department, whether it's doing it by roles, whether it's doing it, a day in the life of, I just want to go easily share documents and different things like that. I think that's where we've seen the most traction in looking at it and saying, hey, while we're doing this, we had one where we were looking at the Office 365 usage statistics, and we noticed that OneDrive had a lot of storage and it had a lot of syncing, but it had little to no sharing. Well, if you're not sharing from OneDrive, you know what you're doing. You're attaching it as an email, and then you're just taking it out and you're double storing your documents. And so we went in and did some campaigns that said, look how easy it is to share right from where you're at. So doing campaigns like that, over time, we saw that number come up. And we saw that number trending upwards. So we were able to actually look at the usage statistics and say, maybe this isn't the best behavior, because if they're not doing the desired behavior, that means they're doing something that's probably not best. How can we address that with training? And to them, it didn't feel like training. It's like, oh, cool, we can do this. Most of them just don't know. They just do what they're naturally used to doing. So those are some of the biggest wins I think we've seen this year.
And so when we look at this, we're looking at it and saying you need to have somebody in your organization or outside of your organization who's looking at end user adoption, end user training, communication planning for these ongoing technology
Yes.
changes as a consultant, mapping them to the business goals. They're no longer, training and end user adoption is not on a different cycle than the technologies themselves. They're on the same cycle.
And the best success we've seen is when the person who owns that has been from a training or a communications department, and they're partnered with IT to the point that they're saying, here's the communications because I understand the end users, this is what I want to train them in, and IT is giving it the thumbs up to feel, I am so comfortable with you giving this training, it's the features we want, but IT is not responsible for managing that training. And that's where we've seen the most success and traction, because then it becomes part of my job as being communications or training for the organization, whereas IT can be more about, I need to keep the systems going, I need to make sure we're doing them, but that isn't necessarily in my wheelhouse or my skill set. And so we've seen the most results there.
Well, excuse me. And then, just to kind of come back to, it doesn't stop, and the concept of that is, I think that even though we sort of evangelize this all along with the idea of end user adoption, how important it is to keep it going, I think finally what started to happen with some of our customers is they realized, it doesn't matter how many times you say it out loud, they realized, they went, oh, after we're done migrating, it's still changing, right? You know it. I mean, they're not dumb. They're smart enough to understand this is happening, but it's such a paradigm shift from what they're used to. I mean, let's be honest. We got to the end of the migration and went, I can relax. And the reality is, if you just finished your migration 3 months ago, the day you were done, Teams came out. That changed everything you were doing. Like as soon as you were done, everything you were doing is completely different than it was before, right? So that I think that finally understanding that concept and building a constantly evolving adoption plan is another light bulb that's starting to go off.
But it's not as scary as it used to be, right? So
Right,
it used to be like, okay, Office 2003 is out, and now it's 2010, and they look totally different, and oh my goodness. But Teams and Planner that's coming soon, and Power Apps and Flow, all of these pieces that are soon coming to the GovCloud, they all interact with and work with Office 365. So it's almost like Lego blocks that you can stack on top of each other. So while it's constantly things changing, we've seen over the last year or so that they're complements to each other, enhancing. It's not like a replacement. It's not like we're saying this is how you're doing communication today, and tomorrow you're no longer doing it this way. You're doing this totally different tool or this totally different way. It's more of now that they just keep coming closer together and becoming a unified experience. So while it's constantly changing, I think it's less scary.
Yeah, I agree, and I think I always want to kind of round off these conversations and say, look, whether it's life cycle, it's assessment, whatever the word you're going to use, ultimately you need to know what you own. You need to understand where you want to be from a business objectives during this milestone or task, or because again, as we've already said, it's ongoing, so you're never done, right? But in this phase of this, where do you want to be, and then work backwards to get technology to get there. Same thing holds true now with the training and adoption, because it is a project unto itself. It's a consultant, it's a business process, it's something that you have to integrate all the time. So I think we're totally hit it last year. I think no doubt about it, that's where we need to be. But I want to kind of flip the bit on that dialogue, because we have customers today that we're supporting from a technology project perspective who are struggling getting their head around, this is going to be the first time I've used it in this entire summit, transformation. I'm very proud of myself. It's the first time I've used that.
Very nice job.
But who are struggling with this transformation, or not just a transformation from a technology perspective, a mindset. It's not about an email migration. That's the low-hanging fruit. And it might take you a month, it might take you 2 years to do that email migration. But there's so much other stuff around here. So what should we be saying to those customers? Dave, I'll start with you. Like, what should we be saying to those customers?
Well, and it's not only that transformation, but our government customers are dealing with other impactful things going on. They talk about the silver tsunami and the fact that there are a lot of IT workers in the workforce that are getting to retirement age, and they also expect that the workforce gets younger anyway, right? As new people come in, they're expecting these technologies, so there's both a benefit and somewhat of a disadvantage. In some ways, getting into the cloud state and getting that transformation done enables this newer, younger workforce to embrace technologies that they're used to from kind of growing up with it, right? They grew up with mobile devices. They grew up with being able to share stuff with all of their friends. So in some ways, getting through that transformation as the workforce, takes over, the younger workforce takes over, I think will actually benefit the organizations, because the adoption challenges won't be as rich, but they still have the transformation challenges from that perspective.
And even in recruitment of new employees, right? I mean, we have some academic customers, and they're like, how can we offer worse tools than these kids get for free?
Right. Right?
True.
While they're in
Sure.
high school and middle school.
And
Right?
well, it's the same thing for these younger generation, and the government trying to recruit this talent. How can they offer this technology that's, so far behind? And again, I think it's taking a step back and saying, let's go through this process of really looking at where we want to be. I want to change the subject real quick to security. Jeff, what's happened over the year? We on the mark?
So things have improved dramatically versus just a year ago even. We're seeing a lot more of the on-prem only look at within your walls type tools have gone to the cloud, and now they're actually extending the awareness of identity, the awareness of your systems and services between on-prem and your cloud. It's no longer, I go to this tool for on-prem, I go to this tool for my cloud, and never the two shall meet. Well, they're finally coming together now. They're actually introducing unified labels now. Who'd have thunk? Across your conditional access, across your shadow IT awareness, across your policies and everything else coming together finally, where some of the different acquisitions Microsoft has made over the years, they're finally bridging that gap between all the different tools and technologies and making a unified product set so you can actually take advantage of automation now. That has worked so much better than ever before, where from user adoption, from a technology, all the acceleration aspects of it, with automation in the back end, you can now have all these policies and features and everything else in place where the users don't have to worry about that anymore. They create a new email, it relates to a particular project. They know that from IT and from the business perspective, that project is a sensitive project. So whenever certain words are included in the body or the subject of an email, it'll automatically tag that as a sensitive email that no one is allowed to forward outside of a particular group of users or outside of the company or from sharing and everything else like that. It's all in place, security is transparent but there, and it only really becomes an issue for someone who's trying to do something they're not supposed to do. So those kind of things has really evolved tremendously just in the past year alone, where security is becoming a lot more ubiquitous and easy and transparent versus the old, here's a big red stop sign, none shall pass kind of scenario.
Can I use Authenticator and MFA and not have to have a password anymore?
Yes. That alone is a tremendous improvement.
Massive.
Massive improvement. Because as I was saying earlier, the biggest cost is passwords. For 24% of the service desk is helping people with passwords. And if someone can go to Windows Hello, use their face to log in, or have the Authenticator app, go to log in, say, yep, that's me, let me in, and they're off to the races. It's so much better these days.
So just to kind of close the loop on that, I think one of the other elements that we sort of missed, but it ended up being better than we thought, was, and that's helped driven sort of this, not only the better story with security, but its adoption in customers, is how quickly things have shifted to M365 being the norm.
Yeah.
Right. I think we all knew that, hey, this is the direction things are going, and we're seeing customers it went from, the aggressive adopters and the core embracers to the norm over this year. Right. Yeah. So when we talk about customers renewing, now that's what they're renewing, and they're renewing it largely to get the things that you're talking about. Obviously, there's other great pieces and parts to it, but security is such a big part of that story because how much of it comes with that. And I think that's one where I wouldn't have thought that it would have went from non-existent in government to practically the norm in government in here.
Absolutely.
So one last topic I want to kind of dive into is one of the areas we talked about last year was around the whole application platform line of business things. Last year we focused on it very tactically around Dynamics 365, although we could open it up to any of the PaaS and app monetization platforms. I think I know we agree that these cloud platforms as AppPlat is really just an incredible opportunity for our customers to gain value and see some real quick wins. But we see an adoption that's slower than I think we would have hoped. I don't know would have predicted. I don't think we'd say it's slower than we predicted, but maybe slower than we hoped. How can we help get customers to look at this as one cloud? Well, I should say in the Microsoft world, it's 3 clouds, 1 identity. How do we get customers over the hump to say, hey, you got to evaluate this. There's big wins to be gotten here.
Well, I think initially, and we keep going back to security on a regular basis as the first thing we look at, and it always works that way. But I think this is really relevant to this. Most of our clients are looking at those apps and putting them in the cloud. They're looking at the data that goes with it, put it in the cloud. The advent of the increase of what you have in M365 and the Azure implications of having all of that capability in Azure, now the comfort level of putting those things up there with all of those things in place says that I'm much more ready to adopt that now than I was before when I didn't have that same comfort level from a security perspective. It was always that first litmus test that said, I'll go if I'm more comfortable with my data there than I am here, or as comfortable. And I think that was the first thing that they said was now let's talk about that. So, and I think that's just starting to kind of emerge itself over the last 90 days or so, and it's going to be much larger for us in the coming year.
And I agree with you on that. I think, though, that the combination that I think you're describing is a continued education that we need to provide. What are the platform benefits of leveraging the full cloud stack, as they call it in Microsoft? Because there are tremendous M365 benefits as it goes through Office 365 and through Dynamics 365, but it's an education. And right now, I still feel as though we haven't scratched the surface of the functionality available in either one of, like each of those three
agree.
silos, if you look at them that way. But there's tremendous platform benefit that Microsoft's building in more and more each day. And it's an education that we got to bring to our customers.
I think it goes back to the you already own it. You know, so I'm using Power BI. Well, now I can use Power BI with Dynamics, throw it onto a SharePoint page, have a flow that's kicking off, have Power Apps, like all of these things that I already own and I can use, I can pull together to where I might be able to pull, you know, one of their default solutions that works in Dynamics, or I can go XRM and build my own thing, and I can build all of these things so quickly and utilize all the things already done. So I'm, you know, learning one skill set and reusing all of these pieces with a familiar set of tools.
That's one of the things that just confuses me about this dialogue so often with customers. That's the confusing component of for me, is many customers are actually going out and buying other platforms for case management solutions or other things. Like they're buying third-party platforms which have additional licensing costs associated with it, when either they might have it, they might own it based on consumption, or maybe they can get a fully integrated story with a singular roadmap moving forward, not just on identity and security, but also how all these things just historically come together. You know, these are things that we should be, like, why are you buying a third-party system? There's very little strength in these days in buying a third-party system vis-a-vis what you can do.
Well, the driver of these acquisitions, right, is not IT, right? It's in the business units. So I think the mission here is to make IT comfortable enough with this platform that they've developed. And I think that's also something that's different from a year ago to today. Even if it's toes in water, you know, up to your ankles or knees, right, in some of these things. We have some Azure deployed. There's some workloads up there. We played around with the first application for a specific purpose or two. Oh, we did a quick thing over here with Dynamics. They're starting to show up in customers. So with that comfort level that we have now, I think we need to sort of get IT to be comfortable with us coming back out to these business groups and saying, you're thinking about this all wrong. You actually have all the tools to do this right now. And while maybe it's not exactly the same as I buy it and click a couple buttons and it shows up, the other side of that is it integrates into what you're already doing way better than that ever will, right? And so, you know, that if that's something, if ultimately you want to be living, you don't want to have something that's completely new and different and separate to do this.
Training.
Right, versus something that integrates into very familiar tools. It looks like the other stuff in Office. It interacts with Excel just perfectly, right? It works fantastically with SharePoint that they're already using. And, you know, one of these days, you know, I'm sure there'll be, you know, Teams parts that integrate with all these, like all this stuff is coming.
So we could talk about this forever, but you know, we're running to the end of the session time. So I'm going to put everybody on the spot because it's my favorite thing to do. You don't have to give an explanation, and you can make it double. You can say something somebody else said. But what's the one technology over the next 12 months that you think is going to be the one that everybody wants to talk about? And I'll start with you, Bob.
I think it's platform as a service. That's the spot. I think we all know that infrastructure as a service is going big. We all know, you know, we're talking about all the, you know, the teams, and you know, we're already talking about that now. The one that we just finished up here at the end, I actually think that's the one we'll be sitting around talking about at this session next year going, I couldn't believe how many applications we deployed that way.
Jeff?
Very similar, I'd say, serverless computing, just because you get to rid of all the legacy stuff that exists out there, go to pure transactional model. You don't have to worry about so many things that you have to in the past, where you can suddenly have, you know, touch an API from here, pull some data from over there. Someone tosses something across the fence to you, grab it, take care of your transaction, toss it to the next, you know, system in the flow, whatever else like that, and you're done. No more systems to support, no more patching, no more any of that stuff. It's all completely gone from a risk perspective, and you move to a model where you're just basically accomplishing the mission of the organization without all the extra legacy and the security bag, or the IT baggage that comes along with it.
Jen?
Well, I think it's going to be Teams still. I think we're still going to be talking about it, but I think it's going to be, we're talking about Teams, but in reality, we're talking about how all of the other applications are now so well integrated into Teams. So we're going to give Teams a lot of credit for it, but we're going to see things like metadata. They've even announced this at Ignite, metadata inside of SharePoint's being displayed inside of Teams. We're going to see pages being displayed. We're going to see Power BI getting displayed better. All of these things are going to be improving. So we're going to get things that the comment's going to be, it took me weeks to do this in previous versions of SharePoint, and whenever I let someone do it, I was afraid of the damage they could do when I let them do it, and now look how easy it is and how empowered they're going to be, which then I think is going to lead to the exact same thing you're saying. Because, hey, they were able to do this and get so efficient. What else can we be doing? And so I think it's going to be a year of empowerment of people and truly utilizing a little bit less fear and opening up some of those tools and then sitting back and saying, cool, let's go, let's keep going.
Dave?
I think I'm going to go a little off script here because I think there's one thing that we really haven't talked as much about, which is Windows as a service. I think fundamentally we'll be surprised to see that customers are no longer interested in managing their devices in the traditional way that they have. I think Windows as a service will actually explode on the market very shortly.
For government customers
For
too.
government customers as well.
I love that thinking. Jerry?
Well, I get the perfect position to be in to hear all of these and then be able to tell you mine. And it's a bit of a combination of all of them. I really agree with Jeff to a certain extent. This event-based computing across the board, I've always felt from way back in web services days that this is where it's going to go. But I think it advantages everything else everybody's talking about. As much as it advantages that, and I'm with Dave on this, but I think it's that desktop in the cloud. If I add that to it, that front door with Teams, all these pieces, you see all these, every bit of this comes together in one big picture. And I think that's what we'll be talking about here next year.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. I want to thank everybody. I look forward to everybody being back in these seats next year. Thanks, everyone.